welcome to the Thursday, February 7th edition of the Clemson Dubcast. Actually changing the script a little bit. Recording this, or at least this part, at night. Usually do it in the mornings, but figured what the heck, gonna get ahead before Friday morning. Wait, did I say February 7th? That's the 1 month anniversary of something that happened in Santa Clara, California. A decapitation of a certain team from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. You might remember the events of that night. This week's guest is Eric George, the Chief Financial Officer for Clemson's athletics department. The playoff, 4 straight playoff appearances, introduces a whole host of issues for somebody like that to sort out, going into it, planning when you don't even know if Clemson's going to advance past the semifinal. Also, of course, dealing with the financial repercussions of taking a traveling party, an official traveling party of 1,000 people and 5 chartered jets to Santa Clara. Price tag for that alone, $1.8 million. That is amazing. And so Eric was kind enough to join us earlier this week to sit down to talk about that. And also a lot of the ways that Clemson has been resourceful and smart in thinking of ways to try to offset a lot of those costs that maybe schools or athletic departments that are totally flush with cash, like Texas or Ohio State or Florida or Georgia or any number of schools with bigger endowments and resources and such, they don't have to really stress about as much. And actually, the genesis for this podcast came from an interview I did with Eric a few weeks ago, sort of digging into the practice of purchasing bonus insurance. That is, all the bonuses that are written into these coaches' contracts in the event that they get to the playoff, get to the championship game, win the championship game. Clemson can and has, for the last few years, purchased insurance to help offset some of that cost. So did a story on that a few weeks ago, and that was the time when I figured, hey, this would be a great podcast. So appreciate Eric sitting down with us for a more extended chat earlier this week. Title sponsor of the Clemson Dubcast, Parham Smith and Archenhold Law Firm in Greenville. Very happy to have them aboard. Couldn't do it without them. Blake Smith and Brooke Archenhold, both Clemson grads, both huge fans. Forte of their firm is medical negligence. They represent patients and their family members in medical negligence actions. They also handle all sorts of other complex personal injury litigation. I can vouch for them. About 10 years ago, a family member had a pretty serious medical situation with one of the local hospitals. Went to Blake Smith, and he very quickly and authoritatively gave us some great advice, and we were very thankful for that. Parham Smith and Archenhold offers free consultations. Give them a call, 864-990-4581 or parhamlaw.com. All right, let's get to our conversation with Eric George, CFO of the Clemson Athletics Department, also Associate Athletics Director, about the finances of the playoff and a bunch of other stuff. Here we go. Enjoy. Okay, we are here with Eric George, the Associate Athletic Director and CFO for Clemson's Athletic Department. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir. That's it.
Okay. By the way, we're sitting here in the McFadden building, massive construction renovation going on. I'll just say that I'm glad that this came after my opportunity to come back with Dabo in the middle of October and do his trip down memory lane, because some of this stuff wouldn't have been here anymore.
That's right. Yeah, it looks entirely different than it did a couple months ago.
So, did you know that the office that you had been occupying was I guess it was the old receivers room, or was it the old staff meeting room?
Offensive staff meeting room. I didn't for about the first week or so, and then Kyle Young, who's on staff here, that was his old meeting room, and he came in and gave me a history lesson.
Okay, well, appreciate you allowing us to barge in there that day. You put everything we didn't expect you to. Once Dabo gets going, talking as he did that day, I guess that was about 35 minutes or 40 minutes that we just sort of took over your office.
Yeah, no, that's cool. It was a really cool little special on him, and just seeing the progress the program has made and the progress the department's made over the last 10 years.
All right, so you have an interesting background. Grew up in College Station, and you actually were a walk-on football player for the Aggies, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I played wide receiver and punter there my freshman year, and then had jaw surgery my sophomore year, and that was the end of things.
So can you just give, I guess, some perspective, or your perspective, on the differences between A&M and Clemson? A lot of similarities, of course, kind of sister schools almost, a really good relationship between the two. What are some of the differences in your mind? Yeah,
they're very similar. I'd say the biggest difference is just the size. College Station is a bigger town than Clemson is, and the school is now about 66,000. So you're looking at roughly 3 times the size of Clemson. So it's just bigger, but other than that, very similar from loyal, passionate fan base, and you've got the military history, the tradition, big time football. It's just very similar, and I'd say that's the other difference would be the scenery here. Having the lakes and the mountains make it much more beautiful than it is in College Station.
Driving to the game this past season in College Station, I was riding with some friends, and you could see the stadium from 10 miles away, maybe more, right?
You can, yeah. It just kind of grows out of the ground as you're driving up.
So, all right, and I want you to help me here, and probably help a lot of Clemson fans too, who made the trip and who were sort of used to their own tailgating rituals or pregame rituals, and they show up in College Station around the stadium 6 hours before the game, and there's nobody there. Is the ritual there more just you go eat barbecue all day and then you go straight to the game? How does that work?
Well, I'd say the weather put a damper on things for sure. It generally is a very, very big tailgate area. The difference is that everything is kind of free flowing. You basically go out on Friday morning and set up your tent. They blow a horn, and it's a mad dash. Just set up wherever your spot is. So it's not like here where you pay and you have your spot and it's assigned and you know you're going to be there every week. You could get bumped around. So it's a little different atmosphere, but I think a lot of it was kind of dampened by the rain. People generally do go out there pretty early, and it's very hospitable like it is here. When, if you're an opposing fan, you can walk around and people bring you in and, invite you in to have a beer, to have some barbecue. And it was really cool for me to see that from the Clemson side. I've been to probably 100 games at Kyle Field and was always wearing maroon and white. So to have orange on head to toe and to walk around and have people welcoming me was a pretty cool experience.
As a financial guy, what is it like seeing, and as an A&M guy, what is it like seeing the transformation on that with that stadium and on that campus with their facilities over the last 5 or 6 years?
It's just mind blowing. What they've been able to raise and put into that stadium is unreal. And they did a really good job of striking when the iron was hot. When they made the jump to the SEC, when Johnny won the Heisman, they were ready to go, and they had the construction plans, they had the donor support, and really, like I said, hit it at the perfect time. But it's just mind blowing to see what they've done, in the last 5 to 10 years.
It's interesting here at Clemson. I guess back around the time when Johnny Manziel was at A&M, 2012, 2011, around there, a big question and a big problem for Clemson and the ACC as a whole was, man, how are we going to compete with these conferences like the SEC and the Big Ten that have these massive windfalls of TV annual TV revenue, the SEC still has financial advantages in that way, but yet you look at little old Clemson here that's been able to, I guess, be smart with their decisions and smart with their money and innovative with their thinking, and they're on top of the college football world. How do you process that? How they've not only closed that gap and created an equalizer, but surpassed almost everybody else.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head with being creative, being innovative on how to do things, and just being resourceful. There's not a lot of waste here. We do a very good job of managing. We give everyone the resources they need to be competitive, but we don't go above and beyond that and give them just excessive amounts of money to spend on frivolous things. But Dan's done an incredible job, and he kind of worked his way up through the business ranks, and Graham, our deputy AD, has done the same thing. So they get that, and they understand, what it's like from a financial perspective, and have come up with some really innovative ways from, doing things like bonus insurance to finding different charter options that maybe can save some money here and there. And we've really gotten a lot of the buy-in from the coaches and staff here as well. And I would say that you can have all the policies and plans in place, but if they don't buy in and they don't follow that, then it's not successful. And that's where our coaches have done a really good job. When they go recruiting, they make it count. Whenever they bring a kid in, they're going to show them a good time, and they're going to do what it takes to recruit that kid and to get a commitment. But they're not spending outrageous amounts of money, and they're not doing things that aren't going to have a long-term impact on the program.
Is there one thing in your mind that makes Clemson distinct in that way, or that sets it apart? One advantage they have over these other schools with much more resources, I guess?
Yeah, I think one thing you can't put a price tag on is just the campus community, the atmosphere, the feel. Whether it's retaining coaches or bringing recruits in, there's just something about Clemson that makes it special, and people don't want to leave. So whenever you get coaches, we're able to bring in great coaches, and where other places it may be a stepping stone to a different job, Clemson's somewhere that they want to make home. And, their families want to be here. When the recruits come in, they want to stay here, and that's something, like I said, you can't put a price tag on that. You could pay coaches a lot more at other schools to try to retain them, but ultimately they're going to want to go somewhere else that provides them and their family the best opportunity. And you get that here. You look at all of our coaches across the board, and none of them are looking to leave. They're all at the top of their conference, at the top of their leagues, and it's because they've got the resources here, and it's such a special place that they're able to do what they need to do.
All right. So after A&M, what was your path from there?
Yeah. So I graduated in 2010 and went up to Dallas and worked at Deloitte for 2 years doing international tax, doing public accounting, and got my CPA, did all that. And it was one of those things that I'm glad, looking back on it, I wouldn't change it, but I'm glad I did it. But at the same time, I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to get into athletics, and don't look to go back to public accounting anytime soon. So I did that for about 2 years, and kind of going into that second year, I knew it wasn't going to be a long-term career for me, and actually started looking at options for a PhD. I wanted to go teach sport finance, be on a college campus, and enrolled in the program at Florida State in the fall of 2012. So I did that for a semester, and towards the tail end of the first semester, a job opened up back at Texas, at the University of Texas. So, working in the largest budget in the country, and just some of the success that they've had. Plus, it was an hour and a half from home, and had the opportunity to get back closer to the family. So that was something I couldn't pass up. And actually, my boss there, our CFO, is now the CFO at the CFP, Dave Marmion. And so, so it was really cool. It was just all around great opportunity to get to work there, and that kind of got my kickstart into athletics.
And then what brought you to Clemson?
The job was what brought me here, but really the people, getting to work with Dan and Graham, and the other folks here was something that was a great career move for me, but it was also a spot where I knew I'd be able to be successful, and I'd have people that were, looking out for my best interest.
And you already knew Graham, I think I read, and you knew of Dan, or do you knew him too?
I did. No, I knew Graham from a conference. We had met a couple of years before that. It was kind of right at the time I got to Texas, was about the time he started here at Clemson. So we met each other and kind of kept in touch. Nothing. It wasn't a weekly phone call by any means, but kept in touch. I did not know Dan, but knew several folks at Texas that knew him and all sang his praises. And
so Graham was the chief financial officer here at Clemson, and he moved up to deputy AD, and you got here in 15. Mm-hmm. What was that like, the transition? You were, I guess, in a secondary role at Texas.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And then you're the main guy, the financial guy here. What was that like?
Yeah, it was great. It was challenging. There were some things. Just Texas had such a large department from a personnel standpoint that you couldn't see and do everything that you get to do here. So it was challenging, and got to see some new things. I didn't deal with capital projects much, and that's a big thing with Dan and Graham, is as you can see from looking around campus. So that was a really cool new challenge, but it was great to still have them here. Graham didn't leave; he just moved up to a different role. So I could ask questions: why did y'all do this? What's the history behind this? Give me some context on certain things. So that was really great. And then just having their financial background was kind of became the three-headed monster, where we could sit down together and talk through stuff, and really allowed me to gain a ton of experience really quickly.
Got to go back to you going to Texas, changing your maroon for burnt orange. That had to be weird.
That was tough. I caught heat from both sides. Everyone at work gave me a hard time for being an Aggie, and all my Aggies called me all my Aggie buddies called me a traitor for going to Texas. So it was tough. I tell everyone that just shows how much I wanted to get into college athletics and how great of an opportunity it was if I was able to put on the rival colors and work there.
I went before the A&M game this past season. I stayed in Austin and went and visited with Shaka Smart for a podcast, and sports information director whose name I can't recall off the top of my head right now. He was just sort of taking me on a tour of their basketball facilities, and I was surprised at how dated some of their basketball facilities were. Like, you just have this notion of Texas. Boy, they're rolling in the money. They must have the best of everything, but yet some of that stuff looked pretty antiquated. Do you have a take on that?
It was, and it's funny you mentioned that, because they just came out a couple of weeks ago saying that an outside group, they're going to build a new basketball arena, and an outside group is going to actually finance it, about $300 million straight up. They're going to pay it, and then the university will basically will kind of lease it through concerts and different events that are there to help that company make their money back. But yeah, it's an extremely old and outdated basketball facility. They've done some patchwork here and there to kind of keep it up and running, and it's a massive facility. It's like 13 or 14,000 seats. But it was really surprising when I got to Texas. Just by and large, the facilities were not where you would have expected for somewhere of that magnitude. Like you said, the largest budget in the country, you would have thought their facilities would be the best. And they were very good, but they were also landlocked. Being in the middle of Austin, there was not a whole lot of room for growth. So it's not like here where you could, find a patch of land and build a new football operations complex and then add a softball field. They were kind of stuck with what they had. But that hadn't been a priority with the previous AD staff. I came in the last few months of DeLoss Dodd's incredible era there, and that just wasn't a priority for them. So they focused more on spending operationally every year than they really did on the long-term capital projects.
Operationally meaning like?
Just normal operating budget, travel, equipment, salaries, all the annual cost. That was more of a focus than, they took the best of the best on the charters, and they had the top-notch equipment, but they didn't spend it as much on the facility side.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, I think back to 08, 09, Dabo's, when he's first taken over, Texas and Oklahoma are the two gold standards at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Dabo, even, I'm sure you've heard, took the whole staff, I guess, in 2009, that off season before his first full season, to learn from Mac and his staff. And I mean, you just can't conceive of at that point of Texas falling back to mediocrity. I mean, do you think it's kind of is it more of a philosophical thing that allowed their facilities to languish, or do you think some complacency might have seeped into their psyche too? Or?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. But you really have to look at it when you've got a fixed amount of money. You have to choose your priorities. Is it focusing on facilities? Is it focused on operational expenses? And it was always something where they, at least when I was there, they wanted the best charters and the best equipment and the best food, and those resources were more important than the facilities. But I think it's every AD, every staff has their own preference on how they want to spend that money. But it is kind of, when you stop and think about it, to go from where they went to kind of, I guess last year was good, but where they were the last couple of years, I do think that complacency probably has something to do with it. And the other part was, I think A&M's move to the SEC opened up the state of Texas to a lot of other SEC schools that previously didn't have any ties to Texas. And so some of the best players in the state were no longer choosing between A&M, Texas, and OU. They were choosing between Alabama and Auburn and Florida and LSU and some of the other schools. So I think that had a large part to do with it as well.
So you get here in 2015. At what point did you first, I guess, have your first look at the plan for the Allen Reeves football facility?
Yeah, that's funny. So actually, as I was going through the interview process, I know there were a couple of times where Graham had to push off a phone call or push off a meeting because of some of the project meetings on the Reeves facility. So kind of knew that it was coming down the pipe even before I started here. But pretty quickly after I got here, really, kind of focused in on the finances of it and, working through the different forms of payment that we were using to fund it and all the kind of side furniture and fixtures. But that was a mind-blowing facility just to see all the different details that were thought through. It was not just haphazardly thrown together. Between Dan, Graham, Coach Sweeney, everyone, there was a lot of thought involved in it. There was a lot of attention to the minor details that a casual person would never realize, that there was a deeper meaning behind, why something was situated where it was, or why it was made out of a certain material, or whatever the case may be.
So how involved were you in that?
Really more just as an observer.
Okay.
That was all something that had, it was pretty well kind of put in place before I got here. And even had I been here at the time, that's kind of something where I just sit back and figure out how we're gonna finance it and fund it and leave the details to the experts.
You and I were talking before I hit record about how surreal this is. I mean, you're still trying to sort of process what happened in Santa Clara. And you're also, you have to sort of remind yourself to sort of appreciate it, because it's kind of like it's become the norm. Back in 2015, it was all sort of new and fresh and magical, I guess, when they go to their first playoff. For a financial guy, even though, of course, it's exhilarating to be a part of it, how hard is that to manage things that you don't, I guess, that aren't on the schedule? It's a spontaneous thing when you make a playoff.
No, that's a great point. And I think the common misconception is, hey, we made the national championship, the money's rolling in. And we put something together a couple of years ago for the board. The first year we made it, the year that we lost in Phoenix, just showing, hey, this is an unbelievable time. It was the exposure, the success was something that we wouldn't trade for the world. But let's step back for a second and look at the financial picture and realize that traveling the entire group out to Phoenix and the cost, comp tickets, there for the coaches and players. When face value of a ticket is $650, that adds up quick. When you're taking the band on a charter and the team on a charter to Phoenix, that adds up. Whenever you have bonuses in play, that adds up. So it was a little bit more of an educational experience, showing that, there are some revenue pieces associated with it. We can, donations will uptick and ticket prices can change, but really that's all, in future years. In the current year, how are we going to make up this shortfall? And again, not saying no one would trade it. We're not sitting here saying, we don't want to be going to the championship game. It costs too much. But it is a concern, and you have to look at different ways to mitigate that exposure. And you don't want to budget for going to the national championship every year, because then you're withholding resources that you could use in other areas. But I think we've done a lot of things internally, and we've also done some things with the CFP that we learned the first year that wound up paying dividends in future years.
Are you talking about the insurance part of it? Or?
That was one piece. We also went back to them, and I'm going to touch on that in a second because I think it's a really cool concept. But we went back to the CFP and gave them a couple of suggestions. One of those being, when you make it to the semifinal game, you go ahead and you start booking the charters, and you know where you're going. You can't book the charter for the championship game because you don't know if you're going to win, and you don't want to be on the hook for a $200,000 flight and then lose the game. But then by the time you win, you've got like 4 days to turn it around, and the airlines know that, and they can charge you whatever they want. So we suggested that the CFP go out and bid out 2 airplanes that the schools can then use. And if one school is driving distance, well, the other one can use both of the planes, because in all honesty, you're going to use more than 2 if you have to fly. Between the band and trustees and anyone other groups that booster groups that go, you're going to use more than one plane. So that was something that they did. They put out an RFP, and with Delta, they wound up providing. They don't cover the cost, but they have the plane locked up for the teams that make it to the championship game. So that was something that saved a pretty good chunk in future years. It didn't help us in the first year when we made it, but we learned from it, and we're fortunate enough to be able to use that to our advantage the next year. And then we also went back to them, as I said, on the face value of the tickets. Every school can give their student athletes 6 tickets for postseason play. It's an NCAA rule. Mm-hmm. So when you're paying, and no one's going to say no. Of course, they're going to provide that to their student athletes. So when you're paying, you've got 115, 120 guys. They get 6 tickets. There's 700 plus tickets at $650 a pop. We went back to them and asked to provide comp tickets for that group. And they didn't provide comp tickets, but they did reduce it back down to the face value for the semifinal game, which I think every year has been about $175. So there's another $300,000 to $400,000 that you can save just by not having to pay for those tickets for the player guests.
Business owners in the upstate and beyond, I want to tell you about Tandem Payment, based right here in the upstate, changing the face of payment processing. Office is located throughout the Southeast. One of the owners of the Greenville location, 2005 Clemson grad. If you're a business owner, you know how painful it is to get the weekly phone calls from the national processing companies promising, quote, the lowest rates in the industry. Tandem approaches this part of it completely differently, face-to-face. The newest program they offer is called Cash Discount. You can eliminate up to 100% of your annual credit card processing fees. The best part of it is it encourages more cash transactions inside your business. Plus, you save the typical processing fees you pay annually. Call Tandem today to learn more about how to eliminate your credit card processing fees. 864-672-1570. That's 1570, or tandempayment.com. So the charter reservation thing, I guess, for lack of a better term, started in 2016.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And then it's been in place, I guess, the 3 years since.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know Georgia didn't use it last year. I'm not sure how many Bama used on their trip last year, but every other championship game, both teams have participated in that.
Do you know off the top of your head the traveling party for Santa Clara?
All said and done, we were right at about 1,000 people.
1,000 people.
Yeah, 1,000 people. That's players, coaches, staff, administrative support staff, trustees, IPTE board, band. It's the whole the whole crew.
All in one hotel?
No, 2 hotels. Well, yeah, 2 hotels for that one. The band always has, contractually, they have a separate hotel, but just about everyone else was in the team hotel right across from the stadium.
And how many planes?
5 planes.
5
planes. 1.8 million.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. And the funny thing with that, when you take 400 people for the band alone, that's a huge number. And then the players and staff and families, and trustees, all that, it adds up pretty quick. But, we paid 1.8 million for the charters going out there for the 5 planes. Like your jaw just kind of hits the ground when you see that quote. But when you start thinking about it, it actually wasn't that bad on a per seat basis. When you look at what the flights were out of GSP,
people are paying $1,600.
Yeah. So you're paying. You're saying 1,000 people. It's about $1,800 a seat. Well, you were paying that for a commercial flight and probably taking 2 layovers, and one in Atlanta and one somewhere halfway. So it really, at the small level, at the detail level, it wasn't that bad. But when you see just that bill come across, or that quote come across, it was a little alarming.
So, were all these each of these planes jumbo?
No, they were all between 150 and 200 seats.
Okay.
Actually, I take that back. There was one that was about 268 or so. That was the CFP provided one, but they were all right around 200 seats.
And so, by means of comparison, in 2016 for the Tampa trip, how many planes were there?
The Tampa one, the team took one big one. They took a 375 seater, but if I remember correctly, I think we had 7 planes going out and 6 coming back. And that was because a couple of the planes were smaller, and then there was one group that had to work a basketball game on Sunday. So we had like a 50-seat plane that came out the Sunday night before the Monday game. So total cost was not as much, but there were more total planes.
Okay. So put us inside your head, day of the Cotton Bowl. How much prep work have you done? Just in advance of for the possibility of the championship, and how much once the final horn sounds on that game in Arlington, then what's on your plate for the next 24, 48 hours?
It's a great question. So there were a couple of us, Tim Match, our Associate AD for External Affairs, and Graham and I, along with a couple of the football guys, really did a bunch of work throughout the course of December, kind of planning for both games. Whenever we sent out the bowl forms asking about hotel rooms and tickets and bus needs, we also asked for the championship game. So we kind of gathered all the information on the front end, and we reached out to the airlines to get quotes. We started working on hotel rooming lists. We kind of did a bulk of the work prior to leaving for Dallas. And then we had a couple of meetings actually in Dallas saying, okay, if we win, here's what sequencing is going to happen. And we sat in one of the hotel rooms after the game and continued to work on that stuff. But I would say the pregame or pre-Cotton Bowl trip is really kind of gathering all the information, getting the quotes, getting all that, and then after the win, it's finalizing everything. Going back and saying, okay, whose numbers have changed. Someone probably said, oh, hey, yeah, I'm bringing my whole family, but now that we won and the time's come, are you still bringing everyone? What does the rooming list look like? Okay, now we need to act on those charters. Are they still available? What can we do? This year, for the first time ever, we had to put a deposit down, a non-refundable deposit down on the charters, just because the military was taking so many of them. So we had a little bit of a gamble there just to make sure that we had planes available after the game, or for the championship game. So that was really the shift becomes more from the planning stage to the execution and to locking everything in, signing the contracts, and really getting the manifest set and the rooming list set.
So in the hotel room that night after the game in Dallas, how late are y'all up?
Whew. Well, we I guess I'm trying to think. We got back, because the game was the earlier one. So we got back, ate a little bit, went in and worked till probably 10:30 or 11. Then went and kind of celebrated a little bit, and then I think I probably went to bed at 2 or 3. By the time I got back to my room, did a little bit more individually in my room, and then packed up and got ready for the return trip. And that's the other thing. You gotta make sure that the manifest is set and everything's, nothing has changed for the return trip, because you still got to get back to Clemson.
So as you're watching a game, a playoff game, a semifinal game, how much of your stress is related to, the actual game? And, oh gosh, because you're, you work for Clemson,
right,
and you want them to win. And then how much is your mind occupied by, okay, if they win, then I've got to do this and this and this and this and this?
Yeah, it's some of both, but I'll tell you, you do so much work on the front end that you want it to be worthwhile. So obviously, as a Clemson fan, as an employee, you want everyone to win and be successful. But selfishly, you do all this work all in December. It's like, yeah, it's a shame to lose the game and it was all for nothing. So you've already done so much. It's like, all right, I've done 80% of it. Let's just finish it on out and get out to California.
So a year ago, when the semifinal was in New Orleans, had they won that game, it was probably going to be a relative piece of cake going to Atlanta. So you guys had already obviously laid the initial groundwork for that. That's just
right.
Bus trips.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, it would have been a lot easier. The one nice thing whenever you do fly somewhere is that everyone has to be on the plane at a certain time, or they're not going. When you're in Atlanta, there's a lot of, I'm going to come Friday. No, wait, let me change that. I'm going to come Saturday. Oh, actually, I'm going to go Sunday, but can you do this? And so there are a lot of individual requests then, because it is such an easy trip to get down there. When it's Santa Clara or Phoenix, and even Tampa to some extent, it's like, all right, you got one shot. You better get on the plane or you're not going. So the hotel piece is a lot easier. The manifest is easier, but it would have been really nice from a fan standpoint to just be able to hop in the car and drive down to Atlanta and see the game.
All right, so you've been through this 4 times. What is the biggest potential nightmare? Not necessarily one you have experienced, maybe you have, but or one that you don't want to experience when it comes to something, playoff, all this organization and planning.
Yeah, I think... And this answer may be a little different than Coach Sweeney or the football staff would say, because obviously they've got a little bit different set of problems to worry about. But I think just lack of availability. If you've kind of set this expectation now, and this is who gets to go, and this is what they get. What happens if we can't find enough planes? What happens if the hotel's not big enough? That's probably the biggest concern. And we travel a very large group from an employee and university standpoint, from a fan standpoint. What happens if you make it to the championship game and now you've got a group of 30 or 40 people that can't fit into the team hotel, and by that point everything else is booked around the city. Where do you go? Okay,
so this obviously, is a losing money proposition, I guess, in some, as you said earlier.
I would say in the immediate sense, yes.
Okay.
Long term, I think you definitely reap those benefits.
Based on
university donations, based on IPTAY donations, based on ticket sales, enrollment, exposure for the school. There are a lot of long-term benefits, but in the immediate year, the cash flow, you're financing a lot of that stuff, but don't have the revenue quite yet.
And so I guess the general answer on how to make that up in the short term is just donations or new revenue streams, maybe, like, I don't know. I guess this is probably longer term, but Dan has talked about adding more luxury boxes over at the stadium.
Yeah, I'd say long term that's certainly how to do it. In the immediate sense, we do budget a little bit. We're not naive to think that we're not going to go to a bowl game every year. So there are some costs that we do budget. So a little bit of that is budgeted. A little bit of that is maybe doing something like a bonus insurance, or finding some way that if we do get to that point, that there's kind of a safety net, so to speak. And then some of that is just using, contingencies or savings from other areas. And, it may be that from a department standpoint, we budget for postseason for all of our sports as a pool. And because we know that it's impossible to sit here and predict exactly what sport's going to go to the postseason and, how much success are they going to have. And you don't want to punish a sport that goes further than you thought. You also don't want to reward a team that doesn't make it by giving them money in their budget. So we do a pool approach for that. And, some years are better than others. So there may be a little bit in that pool that you save. There may be some savings from programs that didn't wind up buying a piece of equipment they thought they'd need to buy, or maybe some of the revenue streams, concessions may have done better than you thought. So there are some other savings or additional revenue items that you kind of come across throughout the year that help with that as well.
How much is each home game worth, just ballpark?
That's a good question. I think if you take out the guarantees that we would pay and you just looked at our normal cost, it's about a $2.5 to $3 million net revenue, net surplus for us for each game.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the no mystery as to why there's such a desire to preserve the seven home game schedule.
Yeah, and too, from a community standpoint, I can't imagine what that would look like for the hotels and restaurants if you were to give up a game in the fall. So that was when the ACC was looking at the 8-game or 9-game model. Dan was a big proponent of keeping it at 8 so that we could have the 7 home games, because we do have the home and home with South Carolina every year that wasn't going away. And then the Notre Dame kind of wild card that comes into that mix. The only way that we could guarantee 7 games every year was to keep it at 8. 7 home games was to keep it at 8 ACC games. And like I said, so that's certainly from selfish department standpoint, like we need to keep that game. But from a community standpoint, I can't imagine what some of those hotels and restaurants would do if we had to cut a game off of the schedule.
Yeah, so a 9-game ACC schedule would mean every other year you have 6 home games instead of 7.
Well, we would give up one of our non-conference, the non-conference games, but in the years when Notre Dame would come into the mix as well, they were, every couple of years you'd have to go to Notre Dame.
Right.
So the way it lined up, if you had South Carolina, Notre Dame, and the 9-game schedule, there were a couple of years. It wasn't every other year, but there were a couple of years in the mix where it would be a 6-game home schedule.
All right, the bonus insurance. That's actually how this idea for this podcast interview was hatched. I did a story on the bonus insurance a few weeks ago. What a way for you guys to actually save some money. Can you just give some, I guess, the basics and the foundation for how you guys stumbled on that and made it a part of your routine?
Yeah, it's been really successful. We've gone 2 years with it and 1 year without, and all 3 years we wound up making the right call. But that's something going back to talking about how can we make our resources stretch further and being innovative and finding different ways. Whenever I got here in 2015, got offered the job in August, but by the time I actually moved here, Notre Dame was my first game.
Wow.
So I already had kind of had a couple of big wins, one at Notre Dame, and when we started looking at it, but by that point, we had already had so much success that the premiums for these insurance policies were too high. So what we really kind of passed on that year and sat down in the spring and talked to a company out of Atlanta about ways to insure our coaches' bonuses to kind of mitigate our total risk. And the way these policies work, you put down some sort of premium on the policy, just like you would on your car or home owner's insurance. And then there's a deductible. So there are a certain set of triggers that the insurers basically feel are guarantees. In our case, 6 wins and making a bowl game, they know we're going to do that. So they're not going to provide any coverage for that. So in those cases, that's our deductible. That's what we take on and pay that out of pocket. And then they basically go out to, this company goes out to all the insurance underwriters, Lloyd's of London and some of those, and they find out what coverage they'll provide on the list of bonuses that we provide. So we give them our entire staff pool, and they'll come back and say, all right, for $200,000, we'll cover anything above $2 million. Or for $500,000, we'll cover anything above $1 million. And they basically just give us a list of options and what those rates are. And that's where Dan Graham and I sit around and, kind of crunch the numbers and feel and see what we feel is the best bang for our buck. And it's something that we don't want to get too greedy, because you're putting a lot of money on the line here if you don't get it. And I don't think any of us feel comfortable enough going to the board and saying that we spent $600,000 on an insurance policy and, NC State made a field goal and now we're out that money. So we want to get some benefit from it, but we also don't want to be so greedy that we risk a lot of department resources.
So in 2015, when you didn't have insurance, how much did you fork out for? You might not remember, but just curious to get a general.
It was because we didn't actually win the championship that year. It was about $2.4 million. I don't remember the exact number, but about $2.4 million that we paid out in bonuses to the staff. And then the next year, we wound up paying out about 2.4 once again, but they really earned a little over 3.4. So we were able to save that $1 million by buying the bonus insurance.
And then this year, Dabo by himself, right around $1 million in bonuses alone?
That's right. I will tell you, so one of the reasons we didn't buy it last year was after we won, the premiums took a significant increase. And we looked at the different options last year, and it wasn't that we didn't feel good about the team and their chances. We just felt like the risk of paying that high premium was not worth the potential upside. And then this year, we would not have done it had it not been for being able to combine it with basketball. So last year, obviously men's basketball had a great year. They made the Sweet 16. And around the time they were making that run, we were looking at bonus insurance for this upcoming, for the past football season. And kind of landed on a point where we weren't going to do it again because the premiums were so high. And when basketball made their run, and we looked at renegotiating contracts, I asked if we could combine, or if there was some way we could cover the men's basketball ones. And that's where it became beneficial to combine men's basketball and football together. And ultimately we bought the policy in August before the season started.
And how did y'all hear about this initially as an option?
So this is a company out of Atlanta that has been to a couple of conferences that Graham and I have gone to, and really got their start on the pro side with golf and tennis. They would go out to the apparel companies and if Jordan Spieth's an Under Armour guy, they would go to Under Armour and say, hey, if he wins two of the four majors, here's what your payout is to him. Mm-hmm. Well, give us 5% of that, and we'll cover him.
Wow.
So that really got its start on, at least on the athletic side, in the pro tennis and pro golf circuits, and then kind of slowly trickled in. I think a couple of schools have done it on the college side, but certainly not to the success that we've been able to have.
You mentioned the missed field goal, NC State in 2016. As they're lining up for that kick, are you thinking?
The
money?
I was gonna say some of the looks that Graham and I would give each other after certain plays. I tell you that was probably the most stressful year. That year, so we put in $272,000 on the policy. It was the first time we did it, with the opportunity to save $1.3 million. So a net savings of $1 million. So the whole time, man, I felt like I put down $272,000 my own money. That was a stressful year, and it's funny though. I actually probably was more nervous on that kick against NC State than I was after the loss at Pitt. Just with everything else that happened, that was a crazy weekend.
Yeah.
I actually felt okay afterwards. I was like, if we take care of business, we'll be all right. But the NC State one, man, that was I probably lost a few years off my life.
So, all right. So you stroked the check in what, July or June?
We did it in August.
Okay.
Yeah.
August.
Yeah.
Okay.
August, and that was one of our things going into that season. You know, Deshaun was back. We had a great returning cast. We felt like the only thing that could happen over the summer would be potentially harmful to us. You know, that if someone got hurt or academic issues or whatever the case may be, that would only hurt our chances, which would then lower the premium. So we felt like it was in our best interest to wait because we were already preseason 1 or 2, depending on where you looked, and didn't think that there was going to be really any upside to pulling the trigger in early spring, and ultimately waited till right before the first game.
Okay, so a couple of weeks later, you're at Auburn. You're sweating. I mean, that's the thing. It wasn't just the NC State game that year. Right. It was Auburn. It was Louisville. Lamar Jackson driving down the field.
That was a big one too. Yeah.
Florida State, for that matter. Probably a couple others. Heck, Virginia Tech game was close. That was a shootout.
Yeah. That whole season was tough. You know, and I think you always look at you know, even from a fan perspective, you look at, all right, which games probably mean a little more than others, and you know, an out of the conference loss on the road at Auburn, you know, you could probably handle that a little better than you could a loss to Louisville or Florida State, where you may not win your division, or Virginia Tech, where you don't win the conference. So they were all stressful, but there were a couple that probably more so than others.
And the Pitt thing, so it took a while. That it was later that night when you started to feel better because other teams were losing one by one, and so probably the immediate emotion for you was probably despair, but it maybe later that night you felt better about it.
Yeah, and I initially, it's funny because I was walking back to the house and I didn't feel too bad about it initially after. I mean, I was obviously bummed for the loss, but still felt like we probably had a good good control of our own destiny. But then once those other teams started falling, then I was really comfortable with it. Similar
feeling this past season against Syracuse.
Yeah, and probably for a little different reasons. You know, we kind of felt like after the first year we were playing with house money. You know, we bought this once and it paid off, so it was a little different suspense than before. But Syracuse was that one took another couple of years off my life, as I'm sure it did everyone. But the insurance wasn't as much of a factor this year because, like I said, we're kind of playing with house money, and because of the basketball combination. Yeah. And there was a little bit more of a safety net where we knew if football didn't have a national championship winning year, but basketball played well, they could balance each other out.
So when do you get the actual physical check?
So this year we won't get it till after basketball because we still have to wait and see how that plays out. We still have some money on the table with the basketball season, and the last couple of games have looked really good. So if we can make a run and get into the tournament and do some damage, then there'll be more money, more savings on that. So we're waiting until the very end.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about this topic or any other topic that you want to cover?
No, I mean, I think that's it. It's just, this is a really, really special place, and it's fun, the success that we've had across the board. You've got women's basketball is coming on strong now. Baseball's had a run at Houston. Men's soccer was in the national championship game a couple of years ago. So it's an awesome time to be here, and to see the facilities that we're building, success that we're having academically. So it's just, I mean, I'm blessed to be a part of this and to see it, but also really excited about what's coming. As you look from a financial side, got a lot of big projects coming up. The ACC network's going to be kicking off in August, and that'll obviously give us a little bit of a boost. So excited to see what's coming, but certainly don't want to take it for granted.
Eric George, thank you for your time, man.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. All right, thank you to Eric George for taking time out of his schedule to indulge all of our questions. Really appreciate that. That was quite informative. So really appreciate his company. Also appreciate our title sponsor, Parham Smith and Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. If you haven't gotten one of the famous koozies, Clemson Dubcast koozies that they've produced, stop by there sometime. Pick one up. I'm sure they'll be happy to see you. Also sponsoring the Dubcast is Tandem Payment in Greenville. And last but most, thank you to our listeners. Got quite a loyal following out there and really appreciate that. So stay tuned for next week's podcast. Already got the gears turning on that one, so it should be another good one. All right, thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great weekend and take care. Cheers.